Hi, everybody. Welcome to Ask a Human. I am Trish McAllister, the State Bar's Law Practice Management Program attorney. And in each short Ask a Human episode, we will answer AI questions submitted by Texas lawyers in plain English with practical steps you can use today and clear guardrails so you stay ethical and effective. Remember to submit your questions on the Ask a Human page, or you can just send them directly to me at trish.mcallister@texasbar.com. And Trish is Trish, McAllister, MC, capital ALLISTER at Texas spelled out bar.com. Okay, well, we've got Kassi Burns here today. Kassi, do you want to do a quick intro of yourself?
Yeah, I am Kassi Burns. I'm based in Fort Worth, Dallas, Fort Worth, and I am counsel with King and Spalding, so in our Dallas office. And I've been practicing e-discovery for many years, and from that work, have a strong familiarity and interest in AI and generative AI. So that's what brings me here today. So thank you for having me, Trish.
Oh, Kassi is so wonderful, everybody. I'm so glad that Kassi is doing this. She's so knowledgeable about this area, so we're very lucky that she's with us today. So I'm just going to start with a few questions that kind of all come together. So I'll just, and then you can just answer them as you see fit. Where should a legal professional start if they want to learn how to use AI safely and effectively, but have no prior knowledge? How can someone who is completely behind the curve begin learning about AI in a law practice? And sort of what are the best ways to learn? So in a sense, where should a legal professional begin?
Well, more than likely you've been using AI in your personal life more than you realize. So, using social media platforms, if you look on there, those use AI to promote what's reviewed. And more than likely in your emails or even searches, you're seeing the use of generative AI, maybe give a summary of results, or helping you or offering to help draft, maybe an email, because we're starting to see generative AI really integrate further and further into existing systems. But let's think about it from a legal professional standpoint. And if you're thinking, wow, I am so behind the curve, I don't even know where to start. I suspect there are many people that feel the same way. So don't let that be a prohibition for you moving forward. It's very good that you approach it with some level of skepticism that's healthy. Especially there's some very broad statements about how AI is going to take legal jobs away. I don't believe that in the least. I think it'll make our work more efficient in some ways. But having that healthy skepticism and interest and just starting with learning the fundamentals is really the right way to approach learning more. Now, in our last Ask a Human episode 1, we did talk about some procedural and practice of law tips attorneys should be considering in the use of generative AI. But in this episode, we wanted to be more practical because we often find people talk in generalities about AI, but people wanted to see, like, how does it work? What does it do? And we'll get into that more a little bit later. Step 1, just understanding what AI is. And you all probably know, if you've not heard of it, the Mata via Bianca case that came out, probably 2+ years ago, where an attorney used generative AI to help write a brief. My husband, who does not want to know anything about the work I do because his soul leaves his body, anytime I talk about AI and legal tech, he came to me and said, "Did you hear about this attorney that hallucinated a case?" So hopefully, you may have heard about it. And the attorney in that case, whenever sanction issues came up, he said, "I thought it was like Google." So let's be very clear. Generative AI is not like your standard search browser. It is a large language model, an AI tool that's been trained on terabytes of data, very large data, and it's created to generate responses based off of predictable text, based off of all that data that it's trained on, a general knowledge. Now, what that means is it's a general knowledge of the data it's been trained on, which is largely online data. So websites and maybe Wikipedia or book repositories, things like that. So that's not a legal database though. So be mindful of that when you use general purpose AI tools like a ChatGPT or Notebook LM, which is Google based. The text may not be accurate, and even if it can't find the answer you're asking, it will tell you something because the tool can be inclined to try to answer a question. So just understanding that distinction is important because it should be telling you then there's more oversight that I need to give to the output as it comes out. So that was step one, just knowing what it is, just a general awareness. You don't have to know the technicalities, just be aware from a risk perspective. So step two, then start with those low risk tasks. So, starting out from a personal perspective, maybe planning a vacation, or something that I did in my free time is sometimes I host a podcast series. And so I would use AI to help me draft emails to my guests outlining what they should expect when they join me as a guest. And I used prior emails that I had handwritten, myself as a reference point. And so that just made my life a little bit easier. Or I used AI to summarize the podcast interview. And so that was a very low risk, knowing that I was going to look at it. I knew exactly what I wanted it to say or what had been said, and it would be easy for me to validate the results. So in the context of legal practice, some of those low risk things may be business development type things, so if you want to write a blog for your firm's website, or if you want to draft a client letter and you want AI to maybe do first draft for you, those may be useful areas to just start using it and testing out. And just remembering that AI is a starting point, not the end point. So it is your junior associate, your paralegal, someone just writing a draft, but you still have that final authority. You still have the ethical obligations to oversee and ensure the accuracy of what's being done. So, as the risk around that content is heightened, either you may decide not to use AI, or there should be more steps taken in scrutiny when you validate the results of that tool. And step three, just being aware of resources that are out there. The State Bar of Texas, making efforts towards this program. This is the second episode of an ongoing series. There are probably also CLEs offered by your local bar. There's also content online that you can look into. Maybe that's something we can try to do is pull together some resources, but, there are a lot of increasing number of resources out there. So just be aware out there and engage. And then finally connect with your colleagues. Now, this is something that might not cross your mind, but my firm, we have a regular kind of a lunch, a brown bag like chat where those of us that are interested in AI integration, we have a call and we talk about what we're doing together. And, some of them are even saying, I hosted a happy hour or lunch a working lunch where all of us got together and we worked through prompts together. And so being able to talk to someone and saying, well, I tried this and it didn't work, or I tried this and it did work. It doesn't have to be in the vacuum, working together and getting ideas, either within your firm, or maybe that's something you could coordinate with your local bar association. Like, hey, maybe we should have a hackathon with our local bar association. I think that the important thing is just to remember it is an iterative process using these tools, and just playing with it will let you build that muscle memory to know how to engage with the tool.
That's very smart advice. And I really like the idea of getting together with colleagues and just chatting about stuff like this, because especially for, sole practitioners, small practitioners, I do love that idea of getting together with your local bar members, or even your practice area section, and just chatting with folks about how they're using it and what they can do, and learning from each other, because it's so new. Everybody's just kind of struggling along, and we're learning from experts like you, Kassi.
Well, and I feel like I'm learning new every day. So if someone's out there, thinking that they know everything, they're probably wrong. So
true, very true. Okay, well, so let's move on to the next question, which is, how should attorneys manage the use of AI while maintaining client confidentiality? What are the best practices for using AI in a law practice starting from scratch?
So, we really wanted to approach this from a standpoint of assuming that the attorney may not already have legal focused enterprise system. So, when we talk about more generally available tools like ChatGPT, which is what we're going to use in our demo, it's just being aware that that tool is being made for the general public. And so it's not been developed from the standpoint of knowing there is ethical and privilege waivers you have to be aware of and client confidentiality issues to be aware of. So no matter what tool you're using, whether it's general purpose or a legal enterprise one, being aware of client confidentiality is absolutely core to your use of that tool. So, again, in the context of general purpose, there may be a limitation of what you can do. You may need to, regardless of the platform, you need to be aware of their data policies, but, just in context. So in a general purpose tool, you may anonymizing everything or speaking in generality, saying, my client Acme Company or my client Mr. Doe has this issue. And so you talk in generalities, but even in a law firm setting, making sure that you're aware of what sort of partitioning and permissioning settings there are to ensure attorneys that may be conflicted out, have an ethical screen in place to make sure they're not getting access to anything that they shouldn't get access to. So those concerns should be maintained regardless. But again, tip one, you just need to understand the platform's data policies. So again, talking about general purpose consumer grade AI tools, generally the baseline is, the default is they're going to use the inputs, the prompting that you do in anything you upload, they will use that to then feed back into the training model and make the tool more robust, because that is the power of some of these tools. There's this thing called recursive learning. It doesn't have a fixed body of knowledge. It can build off of continued use of the tool. Now, there are settings you can apply in the consumer grade that maybe deletes the chats. And I'll walk through that, how you can make those change settings. That still isn't maybe quite as robust as an enterprise focused tool that allows for, confirmed, more rigid limits of how that data is being used. So I would just assume if you're using a general purpose tool, even if you have set the settings to delete the message, I would still anonymize everything. So let's just, be aware there. Secondly, again, I talked about using enterprise or professional grade platforms where possible, legal specific where possible. But I know that can be challenging for solo practitioner or small firms. So I think you all know what your budgets are and what's available. I think that's really where, being smart and mindful of really knowing those data privacy policies and what your budget allows and the risk. Like those are all assessments that you'll need to make. And if you do use something that isn't enterprise, again, anonymize or redact before you input the information. Probably just anonymizing and redacting, you would have to be very thorough and make sure you fully redact everything. So, and then another thing to think about is as you start thinking about how you want to use AI in your practice, have a firm policy. Now, solo practitioner, maybe you don't have to because but even as a solo practitioner, if you have a paralegal, something simple that talks about the use of AI, where it talks about being mindful of confidentiality, being mindful of not only your client's confidentiality, but, if you're in litigation, any received data, making sure that confidentiality, those obligations are still in place. And also talking about validation requirements, that there is still a human in the loop requirement. We have those ethical obligations to validate the results, to ensure there's no hallucinations. And just remember that it's not a final product. It's a brainstorming ideation tool that can be available. It can be a good, change of tone. Maybe you've written something and it might be something that might be too technical or maybe too in the weeds in your legal brain, and you need a tool to maybe help simplify it and make it more general purpose from an audience perspective. So I think, without a doubt, always be mindful of the confidentiality as you're using these tools. That's, I think just a huge takeaway right there.
Thank you, Kassi. Great information. And I do like the fact that you pointed out sometimes it is best to use a sort of a legal targeted tool if you can afford it, but that there are ways to protect yourself if you can't afford it too. So that's very practical.
Mm-hmm.
So moving on to our next question, and getting kind of to the heart of our this episode 2. How do you draft a prompt that effectively gets the information you seek or helps draft a letter? Can you walk us through a good prompt?
Yeah. So we're going to use ChatGPT for this exercise, and we are going to use just a public version. It's not a pro version, it's a public version. So let me go ahead and first share my screen. First, want to walk you through so you can see this is the ChatGPT interface, the web-based ChatGPT interface. And before I start chatting with it, I'm going to double check my settings because I'm an attorney and I'm very concerned about confidentiality. And so, as I said, the default setting for most of these publicly available tools is to use any chat. Like if I said, please help me analyze recent medical records and tests that were run, and I uploaded my own medical records. And if I hadn't changed it to don't save the chats, there is the potential that that information is going to get routed into and used as training data. So that just be mindful of that. I'm going to, if you see the screen in the bottom left hand side, there is this little icon, a round icon that lets you pop up and see some items here. And so I'm going to click on settings, and you'll see on the left-hand side a series of different tabs you can go to. So the first thing I'm going to go to is data controls. And so it walks through what settings you can apply. And so this first one at the top is improve the model for everyone. That sounds wonderful, right? Like I want to help the world. I want to help everyone out there. But in the context of client confidentiality, you don't want to do that, right? So if you open this up, model improvement, that tells you if you're opting into that, you're allowing that content to be used to train the models. But you don't want to do that as an attorney. I would not want to do that as an individual as well. So definitely double check and make sure if it's toggled on, you're going to want to toggle it off. So there we go. So done. Let's do that. Now, you may also decide that I don't want to keep any of my chats. Now, the downside to that is if you want to come back to it later, they're going to be gone. But, I'm deciding I'm going to delete all my chats because I know that if I really want to save it, I'll just copy the content and save it in a Word document. And so it's really, I'm retaining what's truly important. Because, a lot of times these tools you're just kind of like spitballing a little bit, right? So some things aren't worth keeping. So I also like to delete all. And you know what? I may want to change, and I don't want to archive. Well, never mind. I would change that, but I'm not going to, spin my wheels on that right now. Now, something else you may want to do, there's a section called personalization, and it can help adjust the tone of the outputs. And that might be useful because we as attorneys, we are probably talking in a more formal tone than maybe another user out there. And so, going through here and seeing what the options are, base, style, and tone. I'm going to add professional on there. I want it to be professional. So we'll do that. And I'm going to go through and maybe I want to keep the tone warm to begin with, but maybe I'll adjust it later. But, maybe I don't want any emojis in my output because these outputs are prone to having emojis. So I'm going to make that less. I don't want emojis. Um and because I'm an attorney, I'm talking to a client, I'm going to want less bulleted points and I want it to be more paragraphs. So, those are some adjustments you can make. You could also, add additional instructions on your style that would apply to all of your outputs. So maybe you don't want to do that any further. Maybe this is fine, but oh, and you know what? I'm going to add my occupation. I'm an attorney. I've actually not played around this, so this is fun. So we're going um, to do that, and I'm going to not have it reference saved memories, and then we're going to save. So the first thing I did is I looked to see what confidentiality or settings that apply to confidentiality. So that is a great, step one. Now, the prompts that we're going to play with is I am an attorney in a small law firm, and I have a client who's a small business owner. They own a retail business, maybe online retail business. And because they're a scrappy small company, they're leveraging AI where they can, because, that is one of the benefits of AI. It creates scalability for smaller organizations. Now, they came and said, hey, like I heard like that there is a new something about AI regulation in Texas. What does that mean? And so I'm going to use ChatGPT to help me draft an initial draft of a letter to this client about the Texas Responsible AI Governance Act, and it's called TREGA. So it's something that passed last year, and it's coming into effect this year. I think it's already in effect. And so when I know I want to use AI in a certain way, there are some things I think about. This is the question I want to ask. This is the output I have in mind. I think about, the point of view. I am being informative. I'm not being persuasive, nor am I being, maybe adversarial in a, talking to opposing counsel point of view. I want to be informative. I want to speak in a tone and demeanor and use of language in a way that my client could easily absorb. I also don't want to go to the tool and expect it to know exactly what I'm talking about. I want to come to this tool prepared. So one thing I'm doing is I've downloaded the actual language of the act. And so this little plus button right here, icon, you can add files. So I am going to add a file, and I am going to point to the language of the act. Now, you could maybe not do that and hope that ChatGPT will go and find the document. But you know what? You're going to have to validate and confirm that everything in there is accurate. So you need it anyway. So I like just having that ready to go. Yes. Sometimes, if you have preferred writing styles or example letters of things that you've done before, you can also upload that as a reference point of this is my preferred writing style. Now, again, you should redact that or make a generic version of it, but that can be useful as well. So I have a reference document. Again, I want to come armed with the information that I want it to heavily rely on. So, if you're talking about maybe in other areas, maybe it's specific case law that you're referencing, or maybe it's, rules of procedure that you want to have. You really want to do what you can to mitigate the potential for hallucination as much as possible. And then I'm going to write a prompt. So I have a prompt that I am going to share. And this prompt kind of touches on 5 key things. It talks about the role I want AI to have. So it's not like a search browser where you're like, what is TREGA? It is, you are writing a letter. You are writing a letter as counsel for this company. So the role is very important. The context of the situation is important. You don't have to have it. It just makes the output better. So knowing the role of what you want the AI to take or its persona, the context of the situation. Again, and that's where it's neutral. It should be persuasive. It shouldn't be, blah, blah, blah. That's useful. The exact task you want it to do. I want you to write a letter, an advisory letter or a summary letter, just describing what it is, describing the format and the tone that you want. Again, maybe it's more informative with a reminder to reach out if they have any questions, whatever, and any constraints or other special instructions. So the prompt we have, I am going to copy it in right now, and then we'll talk through it. So let me do that now, and you can see what I'm talking about. And as you can see, it's a pretty long prompt. So let's talk through it together. So you are a Texas business attorney. There's the role. I have uploaded TREGA. I have uploaded the TREGA Act, the Texas Responsible AI Governance Act. My client is a small retail business that uses AI in their operations for purposes such as inventory management, customer service chatbots, HR support, and employee scheduling. So that's context. The client has asked me to explain how the new law might affect their business. Please draft an advisory letter. That is telling it what it needs to create. And then it goes and provides additional instructions. Provide a plain language summary of what TREGA does and why it was enacted. Assume the audience has limited knowledge of technology and has an 8th grade reading level. Now, I said these things because, it is an advisory letter about something that is fairly tech heavy. So I just want to make sure the output simplifies the explanation. And, saying something like an 8th grade reading level or a 12th grade reading level, that's a fairly good baseline to start with if you're interested. And you want to give some additional nuance, explain why or how it applies to a small retail business using AI operational efficiency. If you have more information, like it's a pharmaceutical related business, or it's a auto business, or it's, maybe if they're dealing with data that's more sensitive, that would be really good to include as well. You need to identify specific compliance obligations or disclosure requirements. So you're telling in this prompt what is most important for your client to hear. And then also the fourth instruction is recommends practical next steps that the client should consider. And then finally, giving an overview of it should be written in a professional but accessible language, suitable for a business owner without a legal background. And this is where we're telling it what not to do. Avoid unnecessary jargon, and where legal terms must be used, define them. The tone should be informative and advisory, not alarmist. So, you might also want to put in there do not use prescriptive language or something like that. Or you might say, include a reminder to reach out if they want to discuss it any further. So anyway, this is a fairly robust prompt. So let's see. I've not actually used this yet. So we're seeing it live in real time. And ChatGPT will tell you what it's doing. It's reading the document, and look at that. It's already drafting an email.
Crazy. It's so fast. It's just really crazy.
Now you'll see that even though we told it in kind of the customization, we didn't want it to be lists, but it's still, having these numbered headers. Probably attorneys don't write like that, but I think that it's still holding on to wanting to have, enumerated list or something like that. So now this is pretty detailed. So what I might say is, again, this is ideation. You want to continue to test it out and see. So let's maybe do one more edit, and I'm going to tell it, thank you, because I like being nice for the above draft. Can you please rewrite it so it's more concise? That seems kind of long, right? We're in the edge of short attention span. It is more concise. So So let's look at that. So that's something you do. Sometimes I'll read it and say, oh, well, I want this in the end, or so this is where you can make adjustments over time. It's very rare that I look at an output and that's the end of it. I'll usually draft more or iterate with it more, or I just know that I'm just going to edit it heavily myself. Okay, we look at this and we're like, oh, okay, I like the way this is going. This is the draft I'm going to go with. Now, I'm going to pause there because this segues in nicely to one of the other questions that we've identified for this exercise.
Yeah. Kassi, it's so funny when you're doing this demo, I always think about ChatGPT or any of these AI tools as like I'm the director and it's an actor and I'm just telling it what it needs to do, to give it some background information, things like that. But yeah, hang on, I'm like running behind here. So this is a good question to follow up on this is how can attorneys double check the AI output?
I think you start with like known facts. Like there are going to be facts in the language that document that it was analyzing, and I'm going to double check and make sure everything is accurate. So, looking at this more concise document, it still will say things like, it takes effect on January 1, 2026. I'm going to go open up that document and make sure that is correct. Oh, and see, this is so funny sorry, I'm getting sidetracked, but this letter provides a brief. That obviously is not something I would have in a letter. So that's funny that it did that. So I would just go through and initially read it, and I would look at anything, any date, any definitions, anything that is easily, for you to check and confirm that is factually correct. So maybe in the context of a witness depo prep exercise where you're prepping for a witness an outline and it's referencing documents and you use generative AI to help that, you need to make sure that those documents actually represent what's in that summary that generative AI may have provided. So here in the context of this, I'm going to have that TREGA document and I'm going to double check things. I'm going to make sure it talks about no required chatbot disclosure for private businesses. I'm going to double check that. I'm going to see where it has that in the language, because I need to know that anyway. If the client asks about it, I need to know, I'm not going to maybe cite the specific section. Maybe if this is a memo of a junior associate to a partner, you would do that, but for your client, a small business, you wouldn't do that. But I would go through and confirm everything is factually correct. And sometimes the inaccuracies that are fact-based. Maybe it didn't go into effect until February 1, 2026, and you want to correct that. Sometimes its interpretation is correct. So maybe it does talk about no intentional discrimination, but maybe there's a carve out or something like that, So I think that making sure you're looking at the explanation, and it's aligned with what your understanding of that is really, really important. So, and again, I think having that fact check, double checking and going back and forth. And that's where when you're uploading the document and you know exactly your source materials, the validation, that makes your validation easier. So that's
One
mainly
question.
Yep.
Which is just my own little question here as we're going through. Can you, in your prompts, should you or could you say are you only looking, that you only want it to look at what you've uploaded, or that you want it to for a site where it got the statements that it got? Now, that might get a little
Oh, well, let's do that.
Or something like that.
Can you please redraft and provide citations of the sections in TREGA that are referenced in this letter?
Again, I was just thinking that might make it faster.
Yeah, exactly.
Verify.
So if there are elements that you you want to validate, and if there are points in the prompts that you could add to make those points of validation easier, knowing that they could still be wrong, like it could reference a citation and the citation could be wrong, but it can make your life a little bit easier. So the main thing is knowing you're going to have to validate. And again, like the risk assessment comes into play. It's your reputation and your law license of like you wouldn't just capriciously have a paralegal or your kid or your dog maybe tied to generative AI tool that could interpret them to give an advisory letter and not validate the results. So I think like that at the end of the day, it's regardless of the tool being used, being another human or a tech-based tool, you have to validate and make sure it's correct. And I think the more you can do on the front end to give instructions and provide the information you want. And you can say like, you should only use this document as a reference material. Do not do additional searching in the web. That can be helpful. And if you're using Copilot, for example, Copilot is a generative AI tool integrated into Microsoft. That's the benefit of a tool like that. It will only reference documents within the Microsoft ecosystem that you have access to. Or you can enable web search, but you have to actively enable it. So I think that that's really smart.
It actually kind of brings us to this next question, which is, does AI tap into trusted legal sources? For example, case law, statutes, things like that.
I think it's a great question. And I think, what is a trusted legal source? So these tools are going to be searching the internet unless you upload and point to it, at least like these generic purpose tools, right? And so, there could be a legal blogger talking about a case. There could be a tech blogger talking about Triga, but they're not an attorney. And so I think we talk about garbage in, garbage out, and as especially in the use in the legal profession, we're really trying to manage that and not assume it is a Westlaw. And I think as many of you know, there's some information out there, some case law that it's not publicly available and free out there. So you have to go through the proper channels to access them. So do not assume that while Google and other tools may have a lot of capabilities, they're not going to replace well-established, robust legal research service tools out there, like your Westlaws or your LexisNexis or some of those other emerging ones that are coming up out there.
Well, that's so great, Kassi. This has been so informative. I'm so excited that you were able to, share your knowledge with us yet again in our second episode. And I, of course, look forward to working with you in future episodes. And, we've covered so much ground today. I mean, I'm really, happy that we've talked about the client confidentiality, and then you did this demonstration that's, I think, going to be super helpful for lawyers, because one of the main questions we get is about prompts. So I'm hoping that folks will take your guidance and really start giving more information to AI before they ask for output. Yeah. Mm-hmm. And also getting those privacy settings set up.
Exactly. That is absolutely key. And just remember, know that you set aside some time. This isn't something you use and rush and go, be thoughtful about it, be intentional and test it out, especially the higher the risk, the more care and concern on the front end and the validation back end.
Well, thank you so much, Kassi. And as promised, we will continue answering questions on a monthly basis in these short Ask a Human videos every month. And each one you'll be able to see in advance what the questions are so that you can decide whether or not you want to dive in. And we will do another one in another month. So see ya in next month.